On September 19th, 1991, Erica and Helmut Simon were hiking on a snow-covered mountain pass in the Alps at an altitude of over 3,000 meters. The day was clear, and they were following a familiar route along the border between Italy and Austria. But as the sun began to melt the glacier slightly, something strange appeared beneath the ice. A human body, half buried in snow. Their first thought was clear. An accident, a dead mountaineer. Mountains are unforgiving. But as the Simons drew closer, some details began to puzzle them. On the man's feet were leather boots, cleverly stuffed with grass, clearly not from a modern shop. Nearby lay an axe with a green metal blade covered in a strange patina. The man's skin was very dark and wrinkled, but it hadn't decomposed. It was mummified. The couple suddenly realized that they hadn't stumbled upon a modern mountain victim. They had awakened a man who had slept in the ice for thousands of years. He was dubbed Ötzi, the Iceman of the Alps, after the Ötztal Valley where he was discovered. In more than 30 years of research, scientists have learned so much about him that history books have had to be rewritten several times. But the most important discovery was yet to come. Recently, scientists sequenced his entire DNA using state-of-the-art technology, and what they discovered caused a real stir. It turns out we'd been wrong about the most important question for a whole decade. The actual appearance of the ancient Europeans didn't match our expectations at all, but more on that later. When helicopters carrying experts arrived at the site, radiocarbon analysis provided a stunning result. This man was 5,300 years old. This was during the Copper Age, a time when humans were just beginning to master metalworking. To understand the dimensions of this distant past, at that time, Stonehenge was still a small building, and the Great Pyramids of Giza existed only as distant plans. Ötzi was about 45 years old, a respectable age in those days, as most people didn't live past 30. He stood just over 5 feet tall and weighed about 110 pounds. By today's standards, he was small and thin, but his bones bore witness to a hard life in the mountains. The state of preservation of his body was astonishing. The cold and dryness of the high glacier had turned Ötzi into a natural mummy. Skin, muscles, internal organs, everything remained intact. Even the contents of his stomach could be analyzed. This provided a unique opportunity to explore humanity's past with incredible precision. Early discoveries indicated that this man was unique. Scientists found 61 tattoos on his skin. They weren't random patterns or motifs, but purely functional markings, simple lines, crosses, and dots in very specific locations, exactly where X-rays had shown arthritis and other joint problems. This meant that 5,000 years ago, people were already practicing something similar to acupuncture, placing marks at specific points on the skin to treat pain. Recent studies have shown that tattoos were made using the hand-pricking method, a sharp stick dipped in pigment. Each puncture left a tiny drop of ink, and many of these punctures produced a line. For the ancients, tattoos were not just a fashion accessory as they are today, but a true medicine. And that was just the beginning, the first of many discoveries that would force us to rethink our knowledge of the ancient world. Ötzi's clothing and equipment told an equally fascinating story. His wardrobe was a true masterpiece of Copper Age technology. Tight trousers made of goat skin, a hat made of bear skin. And 5,000 years ago, killing a bear was no easy task. Over his fur clothing, he wore a cloak made of long skin. A strip of dry grass provided additional protection from the cold and damp. However, most impressive were his boots. The upper was made of deer leather, the soles from bearskin, and inside were soft, grass-like insoles with a net-like structure. They were high-tech survival gear, each item designed to withstand the harsh mountain conditions. In 2024, archaeologist Eva Eisfeld succeeded in creating replicas of his clothing using materials and techniques used in ancient times. The process proved extremely difficult, She had to find the right animal skins, smoke them, twist the dry tendons into threads, and cut them with flint knives. Each piece required several weeks of painstaking work. His equipment was equally impressive: a flint knife with an ash handle, a bow approximately 2 meters long, albeit incomplete, indicating that he was in a hurry in the last days of his life, a deerskin quiver containing 14 arrows, only 2 of which were fully functional. Birch bark containers served as a lighter. They contained glowing embers wrapped in fresh maple leaves. This allowed a quick fire to be started anywhere. Pieces of birch fungus tied with leather straps served as a natural first aid kit with antibacterial properties. The highlight of the collection was the copper axe. At the time, it was a true luxury item, comparable to modern sports cars. The blade was made of almost 99% pure copper. And here the real mystery begins. Analysis of the metal revealed a surprising fact. The axe's copper came from southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers from where it was found. This meant that the Copper Age inhabitants were part of a trade network that stretched across Europe. In the Alps themselves, archaeologists have found amber from the distant Baltic region, obsidian from the Mediterranean. Ötzi did not live in the isolated world of primitive humans, as we once imagined, but in a surprisingly interconnected civilization where goods and ideas traveled across the continent. But who exactly was he, and what was he doing high in the mountains at the time of his death? Analysis of Ötzi's last meal has revealed part of the mystery surrounding his final days. His stomach contained the remains of 2 heavy meals he had consumed shortly before his death: meat of alpine ibex and red deer, and grains of ancient einkorn wheat. Most striking, however, was the extremely high fat content, almost half of his entire diet. This diet suggested a man preparing for a major challenge. Fat is the ideal fuel for the human body at high altitudes, where the air is thin and the cold is harsh. Ötzi was clearly preparing for a long and perilous trek through the mountains. The pollen in his stomach told a more nuanced story. It was extremely fresh. The plants had been picked only hours before his death. The most interesting detail: the first meal contained pollen from mid-altitude coniferous forests, while the second contained pollen from alpine meadows. Ötzi climbed quickly, crossing different altitudes. Did he have urgent business to attend to, or was he escaping mortal danger? The state of his equipment clearly pointed to tense days, perhaps the last. His arrows were broken and hastily repaired, and his bow remained incomplete. And now we come to the darkest part of the story: his death. A forensic examination revealed signs of a fierce struggle on his body: a deep gash on his left hand, a type of defensive injury caused when one tries to parry a blow, bruises on his ribs, marks of blows, and on his clothing and weapons they found the blood of 4 different people. What could this mean? A group brawl? Robbery? Revenge? In 2001, X-rays revealed another important detail. A 13mm arrowhead was wedged between his rib and left shoulder blade. The arrow broke off and was removed, probably by the killer himself. For a long time, scientists were certain the arrow pierced his carotid artery, and Ötzi quickly bled to death. However, recent research has cast doubt on this account. It turns out that the arrow may not have completely severed the artery. The total blood loss was only about 100 milliliters. Although painful, this was by no means immediately fatal. Ötzi likely got hit, lost his balance, was unable to descend the trail quickly enough, and froze to death in the mountains. Hypothermia, a silent killer, causes disorientation, weakness, and slow combustion. In this case, it wasn't his enemy who ended his life, but nature itself. In any case, Ötzi died a violent death high in the mountains, leaving us with a mystery that we are still trying to solve today. However, the biggest surprises awaited scientists when they began examining his DNA. In 2012, the first decoding of Ötzi's genome was published, and the results shocked the scientific world. The analysis revealed fair skin, brown eyes, and, most excitingly, traces of steppe nomads in his DNA. These nomads were warrior tribes from the Black Sea steppes who domesticated horses, invented the wheel, and presumably introduced Indo-European languages, the ancestors of virtually all modern European languages, to Europe. This meant that these tribes reached Central Europe several centuries earlier than historians had assumed. Ötzi instantly became a symbol of early migration. Museums created reconstructions of a hunter with fair skin and thick hair. Documentaries presented this image to the entire world. History books were rewritten. But in science, one must always be prepared for surprises. By 2023, genetic analysis technology had made a quantum leap. Strict protocols were developed to protect against contamination, and methods became much more accurate. A team from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology decided to re-examine Ötzi's genome from scratch. They took new samples of bone tissue from his pelvic region, the part most protected from contamination. They used the latest sequencing methods. When the results came in, the lab fell silent. "This is terrible," one researcher exclaimed. "We've had this guy wrong for over a decade." There was no trace of steppe origins, not the slightest trace. All previous conclusions were the result of modern DNA contamination. Ötzi was not a carrier of Indo-European genes. The real picture was quite different. 92% of his genes came from Neolithic farmers from Anatolia, the ancient inhabitants of present-day Turkey, who were the first to introduce agriculture, livestock breeding, and a settled lifestyle to Europe 8,000 years ago. Before their arrival, Europe had been populated only by nomadic tribes of hunter-gatherers. This was the highest concentration of Anatolian ancestry among known Europeans at the time. Only 8% came from local hunter-gatherers. This meant that Ötzi was a near-pure descendant of those early Anatolian farmers, whose ancestors came from Turkey, settled in the Alps, and lived there in complete isolation. And where do his closest modern relatives live? Not in Austria or Italy, as one might assume, but in Sardinia, an island in the Mediterranean hundreds of kilometers to the south. The Sardinians are also descended from these Anatolian farmers, and like Ötzi's ancestors, they lived in geographic isolation for a long time without interbreeding with other peoples. So, this meant that Ötzi represented a virtually extinct branch of humanity, a genetic dead end that survived in the ice and came to us only by chance. But the biggest shock was his appearance. Analysis of 170 genetic markers revealed that Ötzi had dark skin, much darker than most modern Europeans. His eyes were brown, and he was bald. It was in his genes. For all these years, we've imagined him as a light-skinned, hairy European, but he looked very different. It turns out that his mummified appearance, as we see it today, is closer to reality than any artistic reconstruction. "It's amazing how distorted our ideas are by our prejudices," admitted one geneticist. This discovery forces us to rethink. Light skin in Europeans is a very recent development, only 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Before that, even early farmers had dark skin. The lightening of European skin occurred much later, when people switched to a vegetarian diet and consumed less vitamin D. In 2025, scientists went further and analyzed the DNA of 47 other ancient inhabitants of the Alps, Ötzi's contemporaries and neighbors. The findings shed light on what society was like at the time. Men almost always stayed in their home villages. This can be seen in their similar paternal genes, which were passed from father to son. Women, on the other hand, moved from other places, married within the community, and brought new genes with them, so the different settlements remained connected. But even among these neighbors, Ötzi stood out. His paternal line belonged to a rare genetic branch that archaeologists have found all over Europe, in Germany, France, and Spain, but rarely in the Alps. His maternal line, it turned out, was truly unique. It has never been found in any other human on Earth, neither past nor present. The origin of the maternal line has not been determined, which could point to its complete extinction, the scientists cautiously point out. Was Ötzi the last of his kind? Or was he a wanderer from a distant community? New data shows that steppe nomads arrived in the Alps much later, in the Bronze Age. They weren't there during Ötzi's lifetime. Back then, the Alps served as a genetic reserve, where ancient lineages survived much longer than in the rest of Europe. The mountains protected local populations from waves of migrants whose genes mingled in the steppes. However, this isolation also had a dark side. Without an influx of fresh blood from other regions, harmful mutations accumulated in small communities, and hereditary diseases were passed down from generation to generation, becoming increasingly concentrated over time. Therefore, genetic analysis revealed that Ötzi had a predisposition to several diseases, including obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Fortunately, his active lifestyle prevented most of them. The story of Ötzi's last days remains a mystery. Isotope analyses show that he frequently moved between different altitudes. He may have practiced herding in the highlands. But what drove him to climb the fatal pass on that fateful day? The blood of 4 different people found on his belongings points to a serious conflict. He may have been involved in a dispute in the valley and then fled into the mountains to hide. His enemies caught up with him, wounded him with an arrow, but didn't kill him, thinking he would die alone. And that's exactly what happened. Ötzi froze to death, alone high in the mountains, becoming the last witness to a vanished world. Ötzi's body is a veritable time machine in human form. Each of his cells holds secrets from 5,000 years ago. The DNA of his gut bacteria can reveal the microbes that lived in the bodies of our ancestors. Pollen grains stuck in his lungs enable a reconstruction of the vegetation of that time. Parasites reveal the diseases that Copper Age people had to face and how advanced their hygiene was. Ötzi forces us to confront a harsh truth. We often see in the past what we want to see. We thought we knew his face, but it turns out we invented it. We thought we understood his origins, but it turns out we were projecting modern ideas onto ancient genes. Ötzi's story is a lesson in humility toward science. It shows the dangers of jumping to conclusions and the importance of questioning even the most established theories. But it is also a fascinating glimpse into a past in which old Europe was a mosaic of peoples and cultures, many of which have disappeared without a trace. Who was he really? Was he the last of his tribe? A traveler from faraway lands? A victim of an ancient conflict? His frozen body has given us many answers, but raised even more questions. Perhaps this is Ötzi's greatest value. He shows how little we know about our past. The Iceman of the Alps continues to fascinate us, even 30 years after his discovery. Every technological achievement sheds new light. Who knows what secrets his ancient DNA still holds, and what facts about human history still need to be re-examined.